Alrighty, y'all, this is world-class jerk, and I have a war story for you, okay? I left on vacation for about a week, and when I returned, my monitor no longer worked anymore. And so the issue here is that I don't have a monitor anymore. So you may be asking yourself, world-class jerk, how exactly is it that you managed to be making this video right now? Well, I'm going to tell you. It's because I'm using an actual, if you can see here, I'm using an actual TV instead of a monitor because I'm always persevering for the viewer. So hopefully you can appreciate that value with the lengths I went to in order to make this video. And so, yes, without further ado, we are indeed going to be reviewing early game tips and tricks in Astroneer. And so, yes, without further ado, we're going to get straight into that now, and I will see you there. But wait, before we do, you should join my Discord, link in the description. To become a jerk today, you should hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, leave comments and suggestions and all that good stuff. And for real this time, without further ado, we're going to get straight into this. Alright, jumping straight into this, just like I said, because I am indeed an honest man, is that you want to get resin and compound en masse in the early game. En masse, that's just a fancy way of saying you want to get a bunch of it, because if you just get what you need, you're going to need more immediately after in the early game, because everything is about resin and compound. If you want another platform, you need resin. If you want another thing on that platform, usually that's going to be resin or compound, or a combination of the two. So if you need just a few resin or just a compound in the early game, and that's all you get, you're going to be going straight back to the resin or compound veins to get exactly that again and again. And so you want to get as much as you can to sort of pile it up, and then after you get a big pile, you want to make your base because that's so much faster. Storing extra of anything at any time makes for future speed, and that's something you want to keep in mind in the game throughout the entire game, not just the early game. But in the early game, we're talking about resin and compound where that's concerned. Alrighty, my children, next up we're going to be looking at early game power. We want to know how to get the biggest bang for our buck, as the kids would say, and so that brings us to the best early game power sources, which in my opinion, and my opinion is fact, will be going to the medium generator and the wind turbines. Now, why exactly do I think these are the best? Oh, also, by the way, you can throw in solar power if you want to, but I didn't really feel like it. So we just did medium generator and wind turbines for the best early game power sources. But in order to understand why I think these are the best, I sort of wanted to review the pros and the cons of each. The pros of the medium generator are going to be that it puts out a whopping 9 units of power, and that's a crap ton for just one thing, so that's really what makes this extreme. But there are a few more pros, and that's that it's reliable. If it's on, it will generate that 9 units of power, and it is on when you want it on. That's the big thing here, because most power sources in Astroneer are just on sometimes and off sometimes. You don't really have control over it. But with the medium generator, it's reliable. If you turn it on, it is on, and that's that. The next pro is that it has a cheap power source, and that's it. It takes carbon, which is smelted organic, so takes basically the exact same fuel source as the small generator, but gives you nearly 5 times as much power, which is great. And that brings us to our next pro, which is that it's almost always better to use than the small generator, which sounds unfair because obviously the medium generator is going to be better than the small, so how's that fair? But I wanted to point that out because maybe you use the small generator in the early game, and if you do, then you're going to love using the medium one instead because it's just so much more power for the same exact amount of resource, except you got to smelt it, which isn't a big deal. But anyways, for the cons, we're going to have to put that it requires a fuel source. Now, I know I put cheap fuel as a pro, but the fact that it requires fuel also kind of has to be a con because in Astroneer, nothing else other than generators takes fuel, so it's a con. But the next con and the last con is that it is rare sometimes, and sometimes it's not. I don't really know how to explain it, but sometimes you go into the starter cave right underneath your feet. You go into cave, and that's where you find it, by the way, because I don't want to, I need to point that out. I should have pointed that out first. You don't want to craft this thing. It's expensive to craft. It's expensive to unlock. You want to find one. You can find them in the caves, the first layer caves on the starter planet. No big deal sometimes, but sometimes it's a little more rare. I don't really know what that's all about, but sometimes it's just not hard to find one, and sometimes it takes forever. So I guess it depends on what you're willing to do to get one. Me personally, I love them, so I go after them every time, but it can be a little more difficult sometimes, so do keep that in mind. But now it's time for the wind turbines, and for the pros of this thing, we're going to start off saying that it puts out a decent power output. Nothing like the medium generator, but it puts out a decent output. For the small one, we're going to be getting 1.5 units of power when it's active, and for the medium, we're going to be getting 5 units of power when it's active. And that's basically all there is to say about it. And for the next pro, we're going to put that it's cheap to unlock and it's cheap to craft, at least a small one, and that's what you want to unlock and craft in the early game. I'm gonna spare you the details. Just know that if you unlock and craft, you want it to be the small one in the early game. But also, the next pro obviously is that it's free power. You don't have to put fuel in it or anything. When the wind blows, it turns, and that's power for you. But obviously for the cons, it's less output than the generator, but obviously it can be more if you add more. But per unit, it is less output than the generator. And obviously the biggest con of all, the only reason this isn't literally an overpowered RTG, is because it has inconsistent power output. It'll put it out whenever the wind's blowing, and you're not on the wind schedule, and so that's why we like the medium generator. And so basically the conclusion here is that you want to use these two together. I mean, it's incredible. It's an incredible combo, because basically the wind turbines is your sort of AFK, I don't want to be around to have to make sure I don't run out of fuel thing. And the medium generator is going to be, hey, I'd be willing to spend some fuel to get this done faster. And it's a great combination, because the wind turbines will let you do stuff while you're not around. The medium generator lets you do them faster when you are. Coming up next, we're going to be talking about early game bytes gathering methods, of which there are two. And just like the last session we did with the power, we're going to be comparing these two methods and showing their pros and cons. Now, the two methods that we're going to be talking about are obviously the research chamber, which we all know about. You just put something in the research chamber and then you hit research. It takes 2 units of power until it's done, no big deal. And then the other method, which you might not use as much because it's only good on Glacio, is where you just go around in the caves and you gather the rock bite things. Now, why am I mentioning this if it's only good on Glacio? Well, because we don't really need it to be good in the early game, but as we'll get into later, it depends on your situation whether or not you want to use that method anyway. And so we're going to start off with the researching chamber method here, and we're going to start off with its pros. The first of which is that you can just go AFK. No big deal, it is an automatic process as long as you have power supplied. And so, yes, you can go AFK. And the next pro is that it has the potential to outpace the cave rock method, which, you know, the cave rocks method, it can be faster, but the research chamber, you can just add more research chambers and add more research, and it's doing it all automatically, so it can be faster than the gathering the cave rock bite samples or whatever they're called. But for the cons, it requires a research chamber, obviously, which doesn't sound like much of a con, but we're talking about the early game here. And so maybe you don't have a base fully set up yet, so that can be considered a con. Also, though, it draws power while active, so if you want to use power for something else, maybe that's another reason why you wouldn't want to use this method in the early game. And then, obviously, lastly here on the cons is that it becomes less efficient over time as the samples close by are used up, and then the next ones are further away because of it. Let's say, for example, there's a research sample right beside your base, and you research it in the research chamber. The next one's further away, so on and so forth, until they are further away and more out of reach and less convenient to get to, and so that is the cons of using the research chamber. But next up is the cave rock things. I don't know what to call them, so I'm just going to call them the cave rocks. We all know what I'm talking about. You hold F on them and you get bites from them. They are in the caves everywhere. You've definitely seen them before. But for the pros rather, of this thing, we're going to get started off by saying the efficiency remains basically unchanged due to respawns. Now, what I mean by that is, unlike the research chamber, the research samples that you use for the cave rocks, they respawn. The cave rocks, once you hold F on them, about 30 minutes later or something like that, they're back again, so the efficiency doesn't really change because of that. And then obviously another pro is that you do not need a base. You can just need tethers. As long as you got tethers, you can get the cave rock bites, no problem at all. But now for the cons, and that is that there's not really a whole lot of room for improvement. I mean, you can make an AFK version, but you are ultimately limited by how fast they respawn, and that's really what this is about. So there's not a whole lot of room for improvement, although it can be improved upon. There's not too much room there. But another con would also, or the last con here as well, actually, is it's generally only faster when you have no base. If you have research chambers already, that's probably the best method, but if you're really early game and you're trying to like speedrun bites for some reason, this just may be the way to go for you, especially if you don't want to make research chambers or waste any power from your base. Alright guys, here we are on our next to last point, and I'm just going to be honest with you, it's 11 p.m. and I want to go sleep, so I'm fixing to pick up the pace on these last 2 points here. But right now we're going to be covering up the soil centrifuge, or we're going to be covering the soil centrifuge, and the thing about the soil centrifuge is that we're not actually comparing it to anything else, but we're still going to go over the pros and cons. So the pros of this thing, it very quickly becomes essential for getting cheap stuff fast, because just like with the research samples for the research chamber, when you get the stuff that's close by, it's further away next time, and that quickly becomes the case for stuff you're using all the time, such as compound and organic. So very quickly, this becomes essential for getting those resources, and soil is just cheap. It's not a hard thing to get, and so you definitely want to use the soil centrifuge for that. The soil centrifuge is actually one of the most important things in the entire game, in my opinion, and again, my opinion is fact, so this is definitely an important thing to use. But another pro of this thing is once you get faster soil gathering methods, it just gets that much more useful because it's already very, very useful. But when you're getting soil so fast that it basically doesn't even count as a resource you have to gather anymore, then it's just crazy. It's overpowered, straight up. But as far as the cons go, it's arguably taxing in the early game to get the bites, but honestly, that's not really an issue ultimately, considering how useful it is, especially since it's useful all the way into the late game. All right, guys, we're on the last point here, and I'm getting real tired now, and every single point's taking so much longer than it's supposed to. Now I'm complaining about it, and that's just making things worse. So anyways, we're going over the widen boost mod next. These are very essential for getting soil faster. Goes hand in hand with the soil centrifuge and just generally mining out things. The drill tool in this game, very important, so you do want to go faster. And the widen boost mod is very good. So for the pros, we're going to say it makes gathering soil astronomically faster, and it makes the soil centrifuge an absolute force in the early game. And then 2k bytes to this is the cons now. 2k bytes to unlock both, that's a pretty big con in the early game, but they're very, very good. So you still want to do that. But another con is that they're not too great individually, and you do want to use them together. Oh, but that's going to have to do it for this one, guys. And as you already know, I'm in a rush to get to bed because that's just the way things are. But actually, I'm going to eat first because I'm that fat, but that doesn't matter, and that's not the point. The point is that this is the end of the video, and you should join my Discord, link in the description. To become a jerk today, you should hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave comments and suggestions. Hit that notification bell. Stick around for the next one. All that good stuff. Have a nice day.